we have not slowed down the inflow into homelessness. Our crisis is so extreme.
Measure H, I think that was half generosity and half impatience.
So this is about housing and homelessness. This is about getting people off the street and making sure they never get there.
I decided this is not for me. I don't like being abused. I don't want this environment for my kids. So I got up and I left.
We have said enough is enough. Being on the streets is not acceptable.
We lived in a car for about a year and a half. I had to step back and say, this situation is not going to define me.
I think we all agree that this is the biggest challenge that LA faces right now. There are others, but not of the same magnitude.
Los Angeles is ground zero for unsheltered homelessness in the United States. Of a total homeless population of 75,000, 52,000 are unsheltered in the county. Angelenos have invested deeply in addressing this crisis, voting overwhelmingly in past years to tax themselves to fund homeless services. As the housing crisis continues and this local funding is now set to expire, Angelenos going to the polls in November will again be faced with the decision to tax themselves to fund housing, prevention, and homeless services. In today's episode, we talk to system leaders and funders about this new ballot measure and what's at stake if it doesn't pass. Join us today as we talk about homelessness, because there's no issue that's closer to home.
My name is Dr. Ryan Smith.
My name is Peter Lawhorn.
I am Cherie Todoroff.
My name's Chris Coe.
Mi nombre es Milagros Lopez y bienvenidos a Homeland.
Awesome.
Okay.
All right. Millie, we'll start. I want to have you say your full name, the organization you work for, what your role is there, and then how many years you've been in the work.
Full name is Milagros Lopez, or Millie, and I am with Hopix. I am the senior manager for Access. I've been with Hopix going on 4 years in October.
And full disclosure too, for the listeners, we work together. And so it's been incredible getting to see you in your roles at Hopix and some of the work that you've done. And so you're senior manager for Access. Talk to us a little bit about what does a week look like? What are some of the things that you're responsible for in your role?
So in my role, I am responsible of overseeing the program managers directly who run the Access Center for Singles, the Family Solutions Center, which services families, the Navigation Center, who is a hygiene center for homeless individuals, adults only, and the Problem Solving Team, who is a team that diverts people out of homelessness or that are about to be homeless with financial help or without, and they just problem solve whatever situation they have.
So since July, your team has served over 12,000 individual people in Los Angeles, which for context, San Francisco has less total homeless population in the entire city than your team has seen since July. How do you lead your team in serving that many people?
One thing that I pride myself on is that most of my team is compiled of individuals who have experienced this as well in their own lives. So they have that same empathy towards the people walking through the doors. They see themselves, they see family, they see people that are close to them.
These are my questions. Let me know what you think.
Yeah.
Can you describe what's going on?
Yeah.
What does the Citizens Initiative hope to accomplish? What happens if it passes? What happens if it doesn't pass? What does this say about what LA wants to do here in our community?
And I think maybe even saying like what happens if it passes or it doesn't, like what is
In 2017, Angelenos passed Measure H, a 10-year quarter-cent sales tax that raised over $500 million a year to fund homeless services across the county. Measure H is set to expire in 2027, 1 year before the 2028 Olympic Games come to LA. Tommy! Hey, we're recording, dude. Good to see you, man.
love it.
How's it going so far?
Tommy, what's up? It's good to meet you.
You're the infamous Tommy, just by the way.
Yeah, this is good, right?
Yeah, this is great.
It's happening.
This is great.
Pull people aside, interview them.
Yep.
we're going to be doing that.
In response, citizens of LA proposed what's being called Ballot Measure A. And back in May, they dropped off 400,000 signatures to the county registrar's office.
Oh, and you should definitely get some shots of the signatures in the truck. Oh, is that where they're at right now? Those are the signatures. Oh, perfect. Yeah, well,
All right, clap it up, clap it up.
I'm getting closer to the event. I just want to get started. Katie, do you have a minute? Can I ask you a few questions? We are recording. Do we have consent?
Yeah, of course.
Awesome, great.
You're going to hear some poor audio in these interviews. It was windy at the event, and we salvaged it as best we could.
So can you tell us a little bit about Measure A? What does it do?
This is the very first citizen-led ballot measure in LA County. All the other LA County ballot measures have been put on the ballot by the Board of Supervisors.
So it's going to be a half-cent sales tax replacing the current quarter-cent sales tax that is Measure H.
Okay.
It's going to fund mental health services, variety of supportive services. Our entire homeless service network right now is pretty much funded by Measure H.
So we collected 400,000 signatures from all across LA County, which was a massive, massive load of work. It was union members and my mom and dad and all kinds of people, churches and mosques and all sorts of people going door to door, asking their friends and family for a ballot measure that will fund affordable housing development. It will bolster and expand the homeless services system. It will make sure that people can get protection when they're facing eviction by fully funding the right to counsel, and it will support supportive services for those who need substance use disorder or mental health support or any other kinds of support that they need to be safe.
What do you say to your family, to your friends, when they come to you and they're like, what's going on? And there's anger or there's tension or there's pain that they're feeling because they don't know necessarily what to do. What is your response to them when you're talking about Measure A?
But I feel like the lack of exposure to the issue drives this idea that people are homeless because they f***ed up. They did something to deserve it, and why should I have to help them? And I think we all need to get back to our core values as a country. When somebody's down, you got to pick them up. I love it. Appreciate that. That's sexy.
Can you talk to us about HI? Homeless Initiative. What are some of your areas of focus? What is your role in leading in the system?
Yeah, so the Homeless Initiative acts as the lead for the county's response to homelessness and also the lead for our prevention of homelessness as well.
This is Sheree Todoroff, Executive Director of the Los Angeles County Homeless Initiative.
We do oversee the Measure H sales tax funding, which largely goes to our nonprofit homeless service providers, provide services and resources to people experiencing homelessness.
Can you talk to us a little bit about what Measure H is and what it has accomplished so far?
So Measure H is a quarter-cent sales tax that the residents of our county voted to tax upon themselves back in 2017 because homelessness was such a priority. It is a sales tax that is approved for 10 years, so it runs through 2027. And it has been largely used to provide services and to provide rental subsidies.
Simply put, it was meant to make sure that services and care existed for people coming inside and coming home.
Here's Chris Coe, Vice President of Impact and Strategy at United Way of Greater Los Angeles.
Measure H was intended to make sure someone helped them get home, help them know that there was housing, help them find it, help them come inside, help them have the other resources once they came inside to get healthy again and to be able to achieve other dreams.
It has had a really profound and major impact since 2017 when it was approved by the voters. During that period of time, almost 140,000 people have been served in interim housing. 110,000 people have come back inside into permanent housing. Over 35,000 people have been prevented from becoming homeless.
You're throwing some numbers out there that I want to just give a little context for because they're quite staggering. I'm from Ohio. The county that I'm from in Cleveland has about 500 people experiencing homelessness. The entire state of Ohio has about 8,000 people experiencing homelessness. This was from last year. You're saying since the time Measure H has been running, over 110,000 Angelenos have been permanently housed.
Yes, that's correct.
Do you feel like people in the county understand that Measure H, these are some of the results? Do they actually understand kind of the scale of what Measure H has done so far?
I think it's really hard to understand the scale of what Measure H has done because our crisis of homelessness is so extreme. The challenge here has been that while we have made a deep investment in helping people experiencing homelessness come back inside, we have not slowed down the inflow into homelessness. This fact that I like to say, but it's so hard to say because it's so unattainable. But if we stopped inflow into homelessness, we would solve homelessness in this county in about 3 years.
Measure H, I think that was half generosity and half impatience.
Here's Peter Lawhorn, President and CEO of the Conrad and Hilton Foundation.
And we should always remember that. It was wildly generous to fund both the sales tax and the bond, right? And it gave us copious resources to work with. But it was also given to us with a responsibility. Resolve this issue in a way that's good for people, but don't let it just become an ongoing thing that you manage. And I think over time, folks are still real generous, but I think the impatience is gaining a little bit the upper hand there. You know, in terms of whether this is a fulcrum moment, I think it is that because there are a lot of good things happening that are coming together, but it's also a fulcrum moment because if we don't seize this window and we don't really put our shoulders to it now, we're never going to have this set of resources and leadership that we've got right now. You know, it should be our job every day to put our shoulders to this and make sure that it happens.
This isn't a question that I sent you, but I want to talk about the time-limited nature of Measure H and when Measure H expires. So Measure H expires 2027. There's a global event coming in 2028, the next year, the Olympics. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the implications if Measure H were to expire and there wouldn't be something to replace it? There wouldn't be a local funding stream to replace Measure H. What would some of the implications of that be?
The implications of no longer having a revenue stream for homelessness would be catastrophic.
I'd love to ask you about what are some of your strongest memories of home or your strongest memories of family?
Ooh, home, it's Cuban coffee in the mornings, bread with sugar and butter, my grandma in the kitchen making breakfast, lunch, and dinner all at the same time, my mom playing very loud music at 6 o'clock in the morning. But then there is that other piece where home was tumultuous. It wasn't a good environment for a child to grow up in, and that just came from traumas, right? But that was home.
Your family came to the States. What was that process like for your family, coming to a new country, experiencing that entire process? What was that like for them?
Well, my grandfather was a soldier. He was an anti-castrista, so anti-Castro. So he was with the Batista regime in Cuba when the whole thing happened with Fidel in 1957. So he was a general in the army.
Wow.
He was captured and incarcerated for about 17 years. After he was released, there's a thing in Cuba called the lottery. If your number is picked or your name is picked, you're able to move your immediate family to another country. So their first stop was Venezuela.
So he won the lottery.
He won the lottery.
After 17 years.
Of being incarcerated. They came from extreme poverty to having freedom, being able to go to the grocery store and just buy stuff. You know, in Cuba, they give you a notebook, and in the notebook, it tells you how many pounds you're going to receive per month per family. So based on the amount of people in your family, that's how much you receive. Wow. So we were good until the Chavez situation changed and it turned into communism. And that's when he expedited everything to come here. So thankfully, we came here legally. When we got here, we already had a permanent resident card. We had Social Security, everything in place, like all of our documentation. So that was a relief, but definitely a change of everything. It was just They were trying to adjust to a new culture, a language that no one spoke. They were very dark skinned, so they would look at them and speak to them in English, and they were like, we don't know what you're saying. It was an adjustment, definitely.
I'd love to talk a little bit about your experience personally with housing insecurity, with what that looked like in your life. Can you talk us a little bit through what led up to that season, what that was like for you?
I went through a domestic violence situation. I decided this is not for me. I don't like being abused. I don't like where this is. I don't want this environment for my kids. So I got up and I left. I left everything. Wow. I only took the essentials. We lived in a car for about a year and a half. And I worked 2 jobs. At the time, my daughter was 5 months. That's the youngest. The one before her was 2 years old. And the one before him was 3, almost 4. And they were going to daycare. The lady at the daycare, she knew that I was experiencing homelessness. So what I would do was everything that I would receive for WIC, I would take it to her. She would store it there. So she would feed my kids all day. And then she would prepare meals for me to take in the car so that we can eat them overnight. It was just the kids and I. And I worked really hard. So I would go to LA Fitness in Pico. And the young lady, the supervisor there, she would let me shower the kids like at 4 o'clock in the morning so that they can go to school and I can go to work. And I think that was essential because you meet people and you never think like this person's going to help me through these situations, right?
As a mom, you have kids. What are some of the things that are going through your mind in that moment or emotions you're feeling when you're providing for your kids and you're fleeing this domestic violence situation? Do you feel like you had the ability to even stop and feel or to think in that moment? Or was it just trying to make sure that your kids had what they needed?
There were very few moments that I allowed myself to stop. For me, it was like, I have to go. I have to keep going. Like, there is no stopping this. I have to just work and push to get them out of this situation. But now looking at it, I actually have a conversation with my oldest, who's 14. And I asked him, do you remember when we were homeless in the car? He's like, Mommy, you lied to us. You said we were camping. And that is really what I would tell him. I would take that as a moment to bond with them. I would tell him we're out camping, look at the stars. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We would sing. We would do like karaoke sessions. You know, the baby was small, so she would just laugh at everything. As a human being, you have those moments where I thought I was like, I'm failing at everything. Like, I really am. I got myself into the situation. Now look at where we are. But I had to step back and say, this situation is not going to define me. They never missed a hug, a kiss, anything from me because we are each other's everything at that point.
From Hopkins in the house.
I'm just going to roam Andy, so whatever you feel like is important.
Do I see my siblings from 721 in the house?
Is he backing up? Okay. That's what 400,000 signatures looks like. It's pretty cool. What happens if Measure H expires and there's nothing to replace it? If Measure A doesn't pass, what would happen?
The vast majority of homeless services would shut down in LA County. I can't even imagine how apocalyptic it would be if everything stopped and, you know, agencies like ours had to close their doors. Even just part of our services, if we had to shut them down or reduce them, it would be a disaster for tens of thousands of people.
What's at stake here is the future of LA's homeless response system. That money goes away without a renewal of resources. You will see 30,000 plus folks who are currently getting help go back to the streets. It's hard to emphasize just how badly things will get if we don't continue to support the services that are saving people's lives now.
If the measure doesn't pass, then we're going to end up in 26 not having funding for a lot of the services that we have right now.
LA County will see even more of an explosion in homelessness. And for folks that don't deal with this issue every day or don't have people that are personally affected by the crisis, you're just going to see more street homelessness. That's like the quick thing that people are going to pick up the most. if you go a little bit more under the surface, we're going to lose $500 million a year in service dollars. If we can't stop people from falling off of the last rung of the ladder in the economy, we're f***ed.
The measure ensures that there's accountability mechanisms in place so that service providers like myself and others will show the results and success that's happening on the ground.
This is Dr. Ryan Smith, President and CEO of St. Joseph Center.
Our work is continuous. As we're thinking about ending homelessness, there's going to be economic justice work that needs to be done. People talk about the rent being too darn high. It's absolutely true. As a renter myself, I understand that. As somebody who'd like to buy a house in this time, I understand that. And for folks who don't have the resources that I have, this is a pathway for that. As we know, folks want to see more affordable housing, and I think this is the vehicle to do so.
We talked about prevention a little bit. Measure A has a really significant focus on this. The number you threw out was staggering. If we could stop the inflow, homelessness, we would solve it in 3 years. Can you underscore just a little bit around why prevention is so important for us to invest in?
So prevention, investment in prevention is the solution to homelessness. We have created and invested in a homeless response system, which is doing amazing work, and it is largely serving people who are literally homeless. Once somebody becomes homeless, the investment, the time, the cost associated with bringing somebody back inside is actually higher than helping somebody who's already in housing stay in the housing that they're in. And so that's way more cost effective to invest in prevention, and we will be able to help many more people by investing in prevention.
We've learned a lot from Measure H, and the world has changed, right? We figured out what we could do better. So this is about housing and homelessness. This is about getting people off the street and making sure they never get there. So the last thing I said was Measure H had a little bit of money for prevention. This has a lot more money for prevention, because something that we didn't account for last time was how many people would become homeless and would lose their house.
It sounds like with the shift to prevention, or more of a focus on prevention, that it's kind of shifting gears from being reactive to being more proactive. It sounds like preventing homelessness is actually cheaper than trying to move someone off the streets once they become homeless.
Yeah, it's not just accepting that people have to become homeless. It is being clear that we can stop that from ever happening in the first place.
We are housing 25,000 people a year. Biggest effort in the country, right? We've got 75,000 people living on the streets. If we didn't have inflow, we would lick this problem in 4 years. Right, but we haven't mastered that. There are a lot of people living in economic precarity, and we got to get smarter about preventing homelessness. And if we do that well, which we're really committed to, then it'll make all the difference.
What did you need in that moment, either leading up to you experiencing homelessness with your kids? What do you feel like you needed then, and did you have access to it?
I feel like I needed support. I needed information. I needed guidance. And no, I didn't have access to it. It was embedded in me. You're an immigrant. You're here on a permanent resident card. It was embedded. If you receive any type of service, you're never going to be able to be a citizen. I was extremely scared when the Trump administration came on board that they were going to start deporting people. And I told myself, what am I going to do in Venezuela? And that is what pushed me to say, I need to become a citizen. I need to tell my community that everything they think about receiving services is wrong. If I would have just had somebody to guide me and tell me and instruct me and teach me. If I knew there were programs like Hotpicks, like a Whole Child, any of those things, I would have gotten out of homelessness immediately, because I had the drive. I didn't want to sit in a shelter. I wanted to work really, really hard and get my kids to where they needed to be. But I didn't know.
So in the community you grew up with, in your culture, it sounds like a resistance to receiving services. Do you feel like that exacerbates someone's situation where they may be eligible for services, but they don't take those for one reason or another? and that makes their situation worse. Have you seen that?
In the Latino community, it is a very big stigma to ask for help. You need to figure it out, especially if you are an immigrant. You came here to work. You didn't come here to ask anyone for help. You didn't come here to ask for anything. So within our community, unless somebody went through something and then you see how successful it was, and now this person can kind of guide you in the right way, the right direction, then you try it, right? And even at that, you're very hesitant because you're like, well, their situation is not the same as mine, right? So you don't know that just talking about your situation, if you have somebody that really wants to help, the possibilities are endless.
Yeah.
But it's just that initial conversation of, I want to share what's going on with me, and can you help me? Asking for help is the biggest issue.
Let's go over here. There's a case at the Supreme Court right now, grants passed, where the Supreme Court's hearing arguments about communities having the ability to criminalize the act of being homeless. What do you think Measure A says about how LA as a community thinks about what we need to do for homelessness?
Listen, if it passes, Measure A is going to show that we have real solutions that are not about criminalization, but are about making sure that we are expanding access to housing, that we're giving people the resources and supports to actually end their homelessness and to prevent people from becoming homeless in the first place. And those are the kind of solutions that communities across the country need.
I mean, I think LA is on the front line of this issue for the whole country, and the way that much smaller communities have reacted to homelessness is sadly predictable. And that case is just like a symptom of a larger like sickness in this country. And I think that this measure is a symptom of how LA is different. Like, yes, we're frustrated and it's unacceptable. And I know there's 400,000 voters right now that agree that we need to respond to this crisis with like systemic solutions that are going to work and get people back on their feet, not solutions that are just about removing them so we don't have to look at them anymore.
LA has really transformed what it's doing for homelessness. We have said enough is enough. Being on the streets is not acceptable. We need to bring people in to another place. We cannot criminalize someone for sleeping or for eating or for doing anything that I can do because I have access to housing. I can go home and shut my door and go to sleep at night, and I have access to food, and I think every person should have that.
LA is a city that believes in investing in real solutions. We have better funded our homeless response system than a lot of places because people want to see actual results. And they know that simply arresting folks or shooing them away or using cops to clear encampments, that's not a lasting solution. Folks are still out of doors. So this ballot measure funds the programs and builds the housing that people need to actually escape homelessness.
Jerry, thank you so much.
Hope you can
Well
do
said.
some of that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
What's your response to folks who have some skepticism? I was talking with another colleague and he mentioned, he's like, some of the skepticism is well placed. They look outside, they see encampments, they maybe even feeling the economic stress themselves. There's folks who are facing housing insecurity who may never have faced it before. And there is some skepticism of once again taxing themselves, once again, getting behind this. What is your response to folks who say, hey, we have to do this again?
You sound like my family during Sunday dinner every week.
Here's Ryan Smith again.
I will say when I do listen to my family, my colleagues, my neighbors who say that, first I have to say I understand. We can't say folks don't look outside and see our unhoused neighbors. They drive around Los Angeles and, go, what's happening? And the economic conditions have gotten challenging. LA is less affordable than it was 10 years ago. So what they're facing is real, and we shouldn't sugarcoat that. But what I like to tell our folks is what you see is important. But let me give you the data and the evidence of what I know. What I know is, and I can see this firsthand, is that we are moving thousands of people off the streets each year. There are encampments that I remember you pointing out that are no longer there. And we move those people humanely inside, understanding their needs and building relationships with them and ensuring that they had a place to go. Even if you don't feel it now, It is happening. Now, we have to do more prevention work. That is the reality. There are people who are 2 paychecks, 1 paycheck away. So we must address folks who are falling into poverty, low income and no income folks who are going to move into homelessness if we don't do something. And if there's anything that we need to be reflective about is how can we do more to prevent homelessness in order to end it down the road? How do we think about inflow?
Yeah.
So I just tell those folks, you're right. We have more work to do. It's complex, it's nuanced, but you can't tell me nothing's happening.
When it comes to homelessness, there's a lot of emotions.
This is the voice of Homeland's co-creator, Andrew Didway.
Anger, sadness.
Yeah.
When you add finances to the equation, it only amplifies it. And there's a lot of money involved. What emotions do you have? And what emotions do you think Angelenos should currently be feeling right now?
I think all Angelenos have a whole range of emotions when we think about homelessness. I think many of us just feel like it's untenable that we have so many people who are unsheltered in this county. How are we as citizens, as Angelenos, as citizens here in the United States, like how do we have a crisis where so many of our households are unsheltered and don't have access to the most basic of human resources like housing and food? There's a lot of sadness, there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of fear and concern about the ability to move the needle on that. And I have always been able to hold on to hope as well. I have been fortunate enough to see that the changes that it's made for people and for households, to see what it means to come inside and have a home of your own and have a key and have a network of people supporting you, and how that just changes the whole direction of somebody's life. And it's a matter of getting the investments in the right place and the scaling of certain really key areas like prevention and affordable housing, and knowing that there are solutions to that. There are solutions. We know how to do it. We just need to get the investments in the right place.
And I mean this with full sincerity. I think Angelenos should take heart in knowing how hard people are working with their money. People are working really hard, taking it really seriously, putting a lot of pride and creativity into it, and getting a lot of things done. You know, people are working in impossible situations.
I feel disappointment when I see tents or something growing, or if I see someone who seems down on their luck. But it is a disappointment that motivates. We have a responsibility to one another, and this should not be. So let's redouble efforts. I think we all agree that this is the biggest challenge that LA faces right now. There are others, but not of the same magnitude. And both in terms of how it impacts people, but also how it weighs on our conscience and our spirit, the soul of Los Angeles, right? So I think it's very important to dedicate our energy to this. I really hope that someday when I have grandkids, I'll have them on my knees and I'll say, look at what we did, right? Don't let any problem daunt you. Don't ever tell yourself that you can't work yourself out of this problem.
How has your own personal experience showed up in your work? How has it impacted how you do your job, where you're now responsible for leading programs that are serving people who are experiencing housing insecurity?
I serve people the way I want to be served. If this was you, if this was your family, what would you expect from this encounter? What would you do for your family member coming in through these doors? So treat them that way. Treat them how you would have wanted to be treated in this space. Being a senior manager, having a title, doesn't define who I am. I don't internalize a title. I internalize the person that I am, and I offer the service as if it was my mom that I'm looking at, if it was my sister, my brother, and I do it with love. I think that is the basis of everything.
As the 2028 Olympics loom and $500 million in annual local funding is set to expire, the challenge of homelessness in LA for many feels even more daunting and unsolvable. In the face of this challenge, 400,000 Angelenos organized a historic citizens initiative to fund homeless prevention, services, and housing in their communities. This election day, these 400,000 will find out if their efforts will be rewarded or if the homeless response system in LA will move one step closer to collapse. On our next episode, No Silver Bullet, we sit down with elected officials in LA and explore this question. What is the role of politicians in addressing and ending homelessness? All that and more next time on Homeland. We want to invite you to join the Homeland by subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts. For more information on how to gain a deeper understanding of homelessness, visit ourhomeland.us for additional content, photos, and more resources on how you can join the work of bringing people home.
Homeland was created by myself, Ben Kay, and Fulcrum Productions, in association with Historia. The complete series is brought to you by United Way of Greater LA and distributed by PRX.
This episode was written and produced by Ben Kay and Andrew Didway. Photography, marketing, and additional production by Jared Beasley. This episode was edited by Andrew Didway, with additional editing by Sam Morgan. Our original music is by Jeffrey Emerson Geyser. Episode artwork by Philippe Martinez. Social media consulting by Veronica Roy. Our Rockstar podcast consulting crew consists of Marisol Bayo, Jerry Jones, Hazel Lopez, and Barbara Olson. Members of the Homeland Advisory Committee for this episode are Sean Morrissey and Brad West. As always, I would like to say thank you to all those who helped us along the way and ultimately brought this project to life. Thanks for listening, folks. Let's keep talking.